whether this works out or not. I've got my little recorder here as a backup. We'll see which video turns out better. Okay. Yeah, it's a little bit frightening. So what we're going to do today, we're going to talk about, we're going to look at ExpressJS. We've sort of worked with Node at a very low level over the first few weeks, just to kind of give you a feeling for what a Node application looks like. Everything else we're going to do from here on is using the Express framework. Okay, so starting today and really through the rest of the course. So I also want to give you assignment 1. It's due in 2 parts. So you have 2 weeks to do it. 2 weeks is plenty of time. It's not a giant assignment, really. Okay. And everything you're going to need to do the assignment, you're going to have by the end of class today. Okay. So part 1 is due. I realize next Monday. Yes, it's a holiday. Part 1 is still due next Monday at midnight, but it's not very demanding. Basically, for part 1, you're just going to have to show me that you've started on this. I'll go into detail in a minute. Yeah, that you've been working on it. And then the final product is due 2 weeks on Monday night. So basically what you're going to do is build a portfolio for yourself using Node, Express, using Node, Express, and having it GitHub and having it hosted on the cloud, okay? There's no database component. There's no Angular component to it. Okay, so it's a simple Node and Express site. I've given you a couple links here to a couple of other, these are student portfolios, students who've graduated in the last couple of years, so you can have a look at what they look like. So basically you should have 5 pages. If you want to change these, that's fine. These are the pages I'm going to suggest that you have. Okay. Now, Express comes with a couple of different templating engines. We'll look at them. So there's a couple of different styles for building the views, building your user interfaces. The default templating engine that comes with Express is called Jade. It's kind of neat. There's a bit of a learning curve with Jade. So we're going to use a different templating engine called EJS instead. The reason is the views look more like what you might be used to in PHP. So the syntax is just a little bit more familiar. So I would suggest you use Jade. Sorry, you use EJS. Okay. So we'll use the Express generator. So we're going to do this today. So the generator is pretty neat. It basically builds out an entire application scaffold for you. So it will create a bunch of folders and create a bunch of default files. So that's how we're going to build our applications from now on. Rather than us starting and hand coding everything from scratch, we're going to let Express set up our website for us. So it will pre-build a lot of code. We'll look at that today. Right. You have to properly manage and place any JavaScript CSS. You can either write your own CSS, you can use a framework like Bootstrap. Okay. You should have comments in your code as you're used to doing for me. And you need to deploy to GitHub for version control. And what I want to see, this is the part really that's due for next week. What I want to see is that you're making regular commits to GitHub, that you're actively working on the project and regularly committing new versions to GitHub. Okay. So basically all I want to see for part 1 is that I want to see you've made at least 3 or 4 commits of your site to GitHub by next Monday night. So it just shows me that you've started, you've worked on it a bit, and you've been backing your code up to GitHub. If you've only made 1 commit, I won't give you full marks. Okay, if I see 3 or 4 commits, that's fine. The application doesn't have to be complete. Doesn't even have to be functional yet. I just have to see, I should see that you have a bare bones Express site set up and on GitHub with a few commits made to it. That's all you have to do. And then in 2 weeks, you need to deploy to a cloud server. So we'll deploy to Azure today. I'll also show you we may be able to deploy to Heroku as well. So you can use either one. They're both free to you. There's some things you can do for bonus marks. So if you want to implement any Angular JS on the front end, I'll give you bonus marks for that. If you want to get your contact form to actually work and send email, if you can figure out how to do that, and there is an NPM package you can use to send email. If you can figure that out, 4 marks. And if you create an external documentation, so things like wireframes and style guide, 4 bonus marks for that. Okay, so all of those things are totally optional. I will give you up to 12 bonus marks for any of those features. Or running your site under your own domain name. That will count as well for bonus marks. Okay. So here's how I'm going to evaluate it. Just make it a little bigger. So the main part is basically for the structure, that you've used the Express generator to set up the site. You're properly linking to your HTML and CSS, and there's no errors in the cloud hosting. Look, and I have to, sorry, change that to February. So it's 20% of your final grade. So you have 2 weeks to do it. This really won't take all that long. It's not that big once you see what the Express generator actually builds out for you. So you don't have to hand code all of this stuff. Okay. I'll show you, I actually built my own little node portfolio, because one of the things I'm trying to do is make sure when I give you assignments that they're not too big, not too small, not too easy, not too hard. So usually I build them out myself. I've been trying to do this now. So this is hosted on Heroku. So I just use Bootstrap. Here's kind of what the end product would look like. There I am, right? I have an about page. I have a projects page, services, and I have a working contact form, and I also added the CAPTCHA code, which we did in PHP. You guys already know how to do this. So I added this in, and my contact form actually works. I would also test, this should be, it is, my form's not very well aligned. I probably fix that. So this is kind of what I'm looking for. Okay. So the idea is build something, and you don't have to get carried away with the design in CSS, but build something. When you're out job hunting, you can say, you know, here's a node site that I built. It shows off what I can do, and I built it with Node Express and version control through GitHub, and I've got it hosted on the cloud, right? These are all technologies that I know and I can implement. So this is kind of what I'm looking for in the end product. If you want to add other things on here, by all means. Okay, this is kind of the bare bones of what it should look like. Oh, and I also did a little documentation file. So this was the form marks. So something like this. A style guide. We'll talk about this in Project Studio a bit more. What technologies. Some quick and dirty wireframes, etc. So bonus marks for doing this kind of documentation as well. Not a bad idea to attach it to your portfolio, because again, it's showing what you can do, that you understand the importance of this, and that if somebody needed you to do any kind of technical documentation on your work, that you know how to do it. Okay, so this piece is not required. It's an extra for bonus marks. Let me just save that change and overwrite the file on Blackboard. Are there any questions about the assignment? Anybody have a portfolio site already done that you're using? You've got one? You sort of have one?
It's there, but it's not updated.
Okay. And what is it, just HTML and CSS basically?
No, it was an Angular template that I used.
Okay. Would you?
Mine was a template. It was online.
Template?
Yeah, in the other class with Tom, I'm also working on it, so I'm wondering if there's a way I could incorporate this in as well, rather than making two portfolios.
Absolutely.
But then some of the pages already exist. I'd have to recreate them in Node. Or can I make like 5 pages, but maybe different? Because I'm going to need multiple pages.
Yep, that's fine too. However you figure out that you can, for those of you who are in Tom's class, however you figure it makes sense to integrate them, can you do it as one? Yes. As long as what you submit to me I mean, for Tom, you have to put it on GitHub and deploy it to Azure anyway, right? So you're already meeting both our requirements. So you'll just want to use Node and the Express generator in addition to Tom's requirements. You should be able to fold in all the things Tom's asked you to do into this. So that's fine, no problem. If yours looks a little different than everybody else's, no problem. Okay? But this is a chance for you to get kind of quick and easy a Node site up and running online that sort of shows what you can do. And the generator really makes this pretty easy. Okay, there's not a lot of logic here. We're really just kind of following the walking through the steps here. There's not much coding. We have no database or anything like that. There's no content management. These are static pages that we're creating with Node and Express instead of as raw HTML. Okay. So we're going to use Express today. We're going to start with a really simple example, and then we'll use the generator that will scaffold out our whole site. And then I'm also going to give you a lab, which will be due Wednesday night, which is for you to practice building a brand new site with the generator. It's pretty simple. Okay. So let's talk about Express and what it is. So we've said that Node is not specific for web. We could use Node for writing other kinds of applications, for doing things like chat, for doing low-level network communications, just starting a server and listening for events happening on a network. Could be on the web, but it may not be. So Express is a web framework that basically handles a lot of the common tasks for a web application that in Node we have to do manually, like we were manually creating a server, an HTTP server, and telling it to listen. Well, Express will do that for us. In the last couple of weeks, we used the Connect framework. Express sits on top of Connect. So we'll use similar calls to what we did in our code in lessons 3 and 4, but we won't access the Connect module directly. We're going to access them through the Express module instead. Okay. So it basically extends what Connect allows us to do. And one of the big things is that it gives us these templating engines. So as I said, Jade is one of them. EJS is another. There's another templating engine called Hogan. We're going to use EJS just because it's probably the simplest one to use. We'll look at Jade as well. It's kind of cool. Some of you may really like Jade. And it extends. We get more with the response object. One of the other neat things it has is a advanced routing system. So we played around with that a little bit with Connect by mapping our URLs, right? We could say, we get a request at this URL, call this function. So Express does a similar thing, but lets us handle it in a kind of more sophisticated way. So this would be a basic Express application, a single file application. We're going to kind of go through this example. This kind of comes right from the Express website, from their sort of getting started quick start. So here we're not using the generator at all. We're actually still hand coding. So some of this will look familiar. Instead of requiring Connect, we're going to require the Express module. We're going to create a new application. We still have this app.use. So if we get a request at the root path, we're going to send this message, and we're listening on port 3000. So it's fairly similar to what we did last week. We'll try this example. So we basically have 3 major objects. Request and response we're already familiar with. We've been using those the last few weeks, so we're still going to use those in Express. The other one we have is the application object. So that's basically our entire web application with all of the functionality inside of it. We'll skip over that for now. So application has a couple important The application object has a couple important properties and methods. So one we're going to use, the app.verb. This is kind of an important one. And what this describes is what type of request we got from users. So the ones we're typically familiar with are obviously get and post. So, but we have some other ones that Express can handle, such as delete and put, which is used for doing updates. So the name of those verbs will help tell our application what kind of operation we want to do usually in our database. A get, a post, a put, or a delete. We've also got app.root, so that's for mapping our URLs, similar to what we did last week with Connect. And the last one we're going to access, the last property is app.param. So this is when our URLs have parameters. Okay? If we think about it, when we did this in PHP, they looked something like this. If I just pull up here, here's my PHP file from yesterday I was doing with the semester 2 students. Right, when our URL has parameters, in PHP, we were passing parameters this way, right? As a query string, so a question mark, the name of a parameter, and then a value. Typically sites now, this is fairly old methodology. What would a URL look like, a more modern, a more user-friendly URL look like instead of this today? How would you rewrite that parameter? So it's more better optimized for search engines. Okay, so we could probably, first of all, yeah, we might replace that with, that's more descriptive. How else, what about the format of it? What would it typically look like in a search engine friendly site? So that would be one thing. We'd replace the ID with the text.
It would just be slash in that.
Probably. It would just look like that, right? We would take out the parameter name, we'd take out the question mark and the equal sign. It would look more like this. And in fact, we probably don't even have the file extension, right? That's a much more user-friendly and search engine-friendly URL. So in Node, we're going to be able to write our URLs this way and interpret our parameters using this format. That's what this app.param will allow us to do, to put on optional parameters on the end of our URL, but we're going to be able to do it in a more user-friendly and more search engine-friendly format using Express. So we're going to create 2 Express sites today. The first one we'll do without the Express generator. This will just be a single page site that basically here's all the code we're going to run. So we're going to create a separate one, and then we'll do a bigger site later on using the Express generator. So here's the Express homepage. It's expressjs.com. This is kind of an important word in the description of Express.js. It's unopinionated. It's a term you might hear. A framework is opinionated or unopinionated. Anybody know the difference? What does that mean in this context?
Doesn't get involved in politics.
It's a good guess. It's totally incorrect, but it's a very good guess. Any other ideas what the distinction might be between an opinionated framework and an unopinionated framework?
One is very set to some standards with very little room for change, and the other one is open for public scrutiny.
Absolutely right. It's a great answer. Okay. So an opinionated framework, the developers have basically set out a very strict set of rules and conventions as to how that framework needs to be used. And you don't really have much flexibility to do other things with it. Express is unopinionated, so it's very flexible, right? They've basically given us this tool, but we can take it and use it in many different ways, take it in many different directions. So we have a lot of flexibility with it. Okay? So it's specifically built to sit on top of Node. You can't really use Express on its own for anything. It's used to build web applications with Node. So we're just going to kind of walk through the install. So if I clicked on getting started and then installing. So if you want to open up a command prompt and browse into your Node directory. And all the commands are actually here. I'm not going to make a lesson 5 directory yet. I'm going to do that later. This is going to be its own application. So I'll run a make dir command, and we'll just follow their example, which is my app. We'll make a folder called my app. You can also do this through either through Windows or through Finder. You don't have to make the directory at command prompt. And then we'll go into, we'll do type cd my app to enter into that directory. I realize this is small. The reason why I'm trying it small is people have been saying lately that my code has been coming out blurry on the videos. So I've raised the resolution, so hopefully the videos are more clear. But if I do that, it means it's going to appear smaller on the overhead. Trying to kind of get the right balance. Okay. So now let's initialize npm so that we can create a package.json file. So we'll run the command npm init. And now we'll just hit enter to all the prompts, and this will build out a generic package.json file. So I'm just going to hit enter all the way through. Not going to worry about a Git repository. So here's my template for my package.json. Is this okay? I'll just hit enter to say yes. You can add other things in there if you want. We really don't need to at this point.
So this should have saved in a node file then?
So if we now go in to the new folder we just created called my app, so far we have package.json. So I'm just going to open up WebStorm. I'll browse into this folder and open up package.json. That file should look like exactly, the code editor should show it exactly how it previewed in my command prompt.
And then I can open it in Visual Studio.
Yep, you can open it up in anything, any text. It's just a text file, really. So I'll just go to the My App folder. Which doesn't want to show up. There it is. So there's the package.json file. Looks exactly the same as what we got a preview of in our command prompt. Okay, anybody having a problem? Everybody with me? Okay. So let's go back to the instructions. So Express now says, now we need to install the Express NPM package.
Where'd you click to get that page? Like the Install Express? Like I'm
Getting started and installing.
Okay.
So we're going to install Express, and it says if we want to save it in our list of dependencies, at the end we're going to add --save. What this will do is actually add a dependency section in here automatically and add the Express dependency to package.json, which isn't a bad idea. So we'll run npm install express --save.
So in -save.
And I'll hit enter.
Warning.
Yeah, we're just getting warnings because our package.json, we left a lot of stuff out. There's no description, there's no Git repo, there's no README file. So notice right away, we now have the node modules folder being created. Express has been added. And this section got added to package.json automatically. So that's what that --save does. It adds this part to our package.json. And it shows us at least this version of Express. is going to be used. So now we have Express set up. So now we should be able to create this simple hello world page. Now, our application, it says, is looking for index.js, so we'll make an index.js file. So in my application, I'm going to create a new JavaScript file and call it index.
Where it says server, just use server.
Yep. Whatever file name you have here, they suggest app.js in their tutorial. That's the Express convention to call that startup file app.js. Really doesn't matter at this point what we call the file. When we use the generator, it will matter. In this example, it won't matter. So in index.js, what do they want us to do? Well, here's our code. So they want us to require the Express package and then create a new application using Express. So we'll require and instantiate a new Express application. We'll just link to Express the same way we've linked to other modules in the past. And this code's just coming straight off of their tutorial. Maybe I can make my font bigger. Let me see if I can. Yeah, there's a little bigger. So now what we want is a get handler. We want to process get requests at our root page. We talked about last week. I think Vadim gave me the correct answer that we said, what URL is represented by the slash? And you said no URL, right? When they're just in the root of the website. So we're going to do this. If we have a get request in our root folder, we want to send back a hello world message to the browser. So let's do that. Send a message at the site's root URL. So when our application has a get request at that URL, we're going to write a callback function with our request and response objects like we used in Connect. And again, this is a callback, so it's non-blocking, so it can handle multiple requests simultaneously. It doesn't have to queue them and process them one at a time. So we'll tell our app to listen on port 3000. That's standard for Node and Express applications. It could be anything, but this is the convention to run these on port 3000.
You don't want the function thing in there?
No, we don't need it there. We can just log a message to the console. Oh, yes, we do. Sorry, we did. They did it as a callback function. Thank you, Scott. Sorry. So we will do it as a callback.
I guess it doesn't matter what you type in the console log. Okay? the Express?
No, it doesn't matter. So start listening on port 3000 and do that as a callback. And our function is anonymous. It has no name. We don't need to name that function. So this is kind of our most basic Express version. So now we want to launch this and try it out. So we should be able to start our application from the command prompt and then try to browse to localhost 3000 and see if we get a hello world message. So if we run it, we can run it with Npm Start.
Error.
And we got an error. It's interesting. Why did we get an error? We have a main. Well, let's see if something else.
Server.js.
Oh, sorry. Let's start it this way. Rather than using npm to start it, we'll type node. And if your file's called index, type index.js. Brandon, you called your server, so run it. So use the node. Yeah, so rather than using npm, just use the node command. I got ahead of myself with npm start. That's when we get to the generator. Node and the name of your JavaScript file. It logged my message to the console. And now I want to try localhost 3000. And there's our message. So when we get a request in at the root folder of this application, it's going to send that response. So our app is still active and running. My command prompt is locked. What will happen if I do this?
Nothing?
Cannot get.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's going to say, right? So we did this last week with Connect. So here's what I want you to do if you have this running. In index.js, I want you to write the code that would handle a request at localhost 3000/about and send a message back to the screen that says, this is the about page. So this is handling requests in the root of our application. We now want to also handle this URL so that error goes away. So you'll need a second root handler in your index.js. It's going to be similar to the one we just wrote.
Do we need to make another JS
Nope,
index page?
nope.
Or we just make like another app yet?
So you take a minute and try it.
So you just needed to say, welcome to the about page?
Yep.
It doesn't. I can put that underneath the listen function, right? The app listen, or no?
That's a very good question, Scott. Try it and see what happens. And tell us whether it makes a difference, whether that app.get is before or after the listen function.
Is there a way to write something that just essentially picks up the 404. So it's like if there's no, instead of saying the cannot get, can I write something to just catch all of that?
In the Express generator, there's actually a pre-built error handler where you can trap for different HTTP status codes. So it will pre-write that. When we use the generator, you'll see it. So you can trap for 404 there.
Wait a second, wouldn't the, like, when we're actually using the, it's like, because we're putting an actual string in, wouldn't we be able to use, what is it, regular expression? So you could just pretty much say, like, make a library of all of the functions you're using and just say if it doesn't equal any of these, just kind of blow it up.
Yeah, that's one approach you could take. You could do that.
Do you need to run it for the CMD again? Before you load it up, or it should be fine?
What do you think?
I think it'd be
Will it automatically refresh when the application is running? Or do you need to stop the server and restart it for your changes to be visible? Try it out. If you're not sure, try it out. Save your changes without restarting your application and see if they show up.
No. They don't.
Okay. So what does this function look like?
It's the same, except you place just the slash with slash without, and then put in your different message for response.
You got it. So we're still going to use request and response in a callback function. We're just mapping a different URL. So we'll try it here. Scott, am I going to need to stop and restart my app?
Yeah, I just.
Yep, I will. So I'll stop it.
Hey, how do you push to get Chelsea?
I'll restart it. So my app is running again. And now I've got two URLs mapped. So I can go to About, I can go to Hello World. I can't go anywhere else though. Did anybody try putting this function down below the listen? Does it still work? Okay, so the answer, which your shake of the head doesn't get recorded on my video, so your answer is no, right? That these functions, the root, so these are called root handlers, right? So we're processing different URLs. These have to be defined above before we start listening for events.
How come opposed to like last week, you don't do like the app.use and then define the URLs?
It's just really a different, in effect, this is the equivalent. That was the connect version of the syntax. Now this is still using connect on a lower level. So it basically makes the connect calls we manually used last week. It does them behind the scenes. So this is Express syntax, and it will pass these requests through the connect module. So connect is now kind of an invisible layer. So we don't have to run app.use here. Very good question.
So should it be running right now, or?
Well, if you're running it and you haven't stopped it, then yes, it will be running. If you've hit Control-C, it will be stopped.
Yeah, but it should be about page popping up now because I've made it run and it's not popping up.
Yes, it should be. If your code is the same here and you've stopped and restarted your application, then your About page should run. Should be running.
I went through that process.
I'll check your code carefully and make sure you restart your application.
Oh, that works. Okay.
So this is Express at a very low level. We've hand coded everything. We will write our root handlers this way we don't even have to write this anymore, this sort of stuff, once we use the Express generators. From here forward, we're going to use the generator. So we're going to close down this site. This site's basically done. We're not going to do anything else with it. So let's talk a bit about the generator before we go ahead and do it. So the Express generator is a separate NPM package. So it will build out an application scaffold for us. If we install it with the -g command, that means it's global, which they recommend. And then when we go to create a new Express application, it says we can specify what type of view template, HTML templating engine we want. If we leave this out, we're going to get Jade templates. Now, Jade is cool. We'll just play around. I'll just show it to you for a second. I think it's Jade. Jade is kind of provides HTML shorthand, which is sort of neat. So for example, they've given you, here's what the Jade syntax looks like. Here's how it renders as HTML. So here's the Jade on the left. Here's what it translates to. And we can pass in variables using JSON. And this is kind of a live preview. I change my JSON variable here. It shows up here. So this is how we would inject a value from the server into a Jade template with this number sign and then the curly braces around it. So there's all kinds of examples. This is how we would use IDs and classes. So it's a neat way to kind of shortcut typing all of your HTML. We just use this syntax and it generates. So if I want to put in something here like, right, it'll generate the tags for me, which is kind of neat. So you can use this. If we don't specify what templating engine we want to use with the generator, it uses this one by default. There's two issues with it. One is it takes a little while to learn. Once you learn it, it actually cuts down your code a lot. I think you can use like it's something like a 1-to-3 ratio. Like for 10 lines of Jade code, you're going to get 30 lines of HTML tags. So it saves you typing. The one thing is the tabbing and spacing is very particular. That's how these things are nested. So notice the title's nested inside of head. It's because I've got, right? So it's really easy to break it. If I do that, I can break it. So it's very, very fussy with your tabs because that's how you nest, is with the tabs. So it's kind of neat. You can play around with it. You can do all kinds of things. You can include variables in it.
CSS, can you do CSS?
Yes.
Or?
Yes, I think
Well,
so. Here.
Past it. It's above you. Okay, so
That's case. So it's neat, and this is what the generator will give us if we don't specify. So you can use it if you want. I find EJS for starting is a little bit easier. So we're going to use EJS instead. So to use EJS, we have to specify when we use the generator, we have to use this -E. That will tell our application, don't use Jade. We're going to use EJS instead for building our HTML templates. So they kind of walk through. So this is what we're going to do. We're going to go through this, and then we'll look at what we get. So I'm going to stop my application. I'm going to type cd ... to get out of this folder. So I'm going to go back to my root node folder. One of the other things when we use the Express generator, so far we've had to create a folder first for our application and then install everything. The Express generator actually will create a folder. So if you create a lesson 6 folder, the Express generator will build that folder for you. You don't have to create the folder first. So let's go through this process. First, we'll install the Express generator globally. So we want to run npm install express-generator--g. We're installing it globally. So I'm just following along what the docs are telling us. So we'll basically use the Express generator to get our site template built out. We'll look at what's in there and then we'll take a break before we actually start changing it.
Push enter.
Yeah, hit enter. NPM will chug away. Okay. So now we run the command, rather than using npm, if we run the command express,
-H.
no, lesson 5, this will create a lesson 5 folder for us. We don't have to build the folder first. And then after it, if we run it this way, it will build out our site, but it's going to use setup Jade templates. We want EJS templates instead, so we want -E.
I accidentally push enter for the -E.
Then go to your computer and delete the lesson 5 folder you just created, and you need to recreate it. So we want express lesson 5 space -E. So we're using EJS for templating.
So I gotta go through the same process all over again?
Yep. So we can see, if we look at what the command prompt shows us, look at everything the generator built for us. It created a lesson 5 folder. It created package.json. It created a starting app.js. It created all these folders, a JavaScript, a style sheet. It gave us a base CSS, an images folder. Notice all of these are in a subfolder called public. A couple of other JavaScript files, and then a views folder with a couple of EJS templates. If I go back to Windows and open up my lesson 5 folder, this is what the generator pre-builds or scaffolds for us. So this is a good starting place for our application. Now we can just focus on our application logic and design. We don't have to waste time setting up all of the infrastructure of our application. The generator pre-builds it all. So public is for static files. Images, JavaScript, style sheets are going to go in here. Roots, this is for our URL mapping and all of our logic. It'll all happen in these JavaScript files. So these are code only. There's no user interface here, kind of like our .cs files when we built our ASP.NET applications.
I put space between the -E, right?
Yes. And then here are 2 EJS templates. So we have a home page and an error page pre-built for us using the EJS syntax. And then we have a package.json and app.js, again, pre-built for us. So our application's mostly set up, but not quite. There's 2 more instructions here. It says change directories to go into lesson 5 and then run npm install. So let's do that. CD lesson 5 and hit enter. So now I'm inside of our new lesson 5 folder. And then we will install npm in here. So we can add additional packages in here if we want them. So we're going to change directories into lesson 5 and then run npm install. Which now adds our node modules folder. And by default, what it does is Express wants to use all of these other npm packages. So when we ran that npm install, it downloaded from the npm site all of these. Body parser, so that would be for doing things like when we're doing a form post and we want to parse out each individual field. It uses that package. We've got cookie parser for managing cookies, debugging, EJS because that's the templating engine we're using, the main Express package, Morgan, which is used for writing log files. We probably won't use it. And there's even a package for adding a favorite icon to your Express application, which we'll maybe do if we have time today. We'll use their It's built in. It's already set up. All you have to do is basically create a favorite icon and Express will show it automatically. You don't have to do anything.
This is pretty handy.
Yeah, it is pretty handy. This is similar to, remember, I don't know if you remember, the very first day of our ASP.NET course in Visual Studio, when we created, most of the time we created empty applications and we built them ourselves, but there was an option in there to create an ASP.NET web application. And when we did that, it pre-built a similar scaffold. It created like a CSS file, it created register login, basically built out a kind of pre-existing site template for us. So the Express generator does something very similar with Node to what we could do in Visual Studio with ASP.NET. So now we can actually run the application. The last thing is we can now run Npm Start, and this should launch our application at localhost 3000. So we'll start it up. Our app is running now. We'll talk about what this is in a bit. And now if we just go to localhost 3000, we get the default. This is that index.ejs page that the generator built for us. So we can look at it. We want to see the code. I'm going to close this project and open up my lesson 5 project. So here's my home page. It's called index.ejs and it sits inside of views. So all of our front end files go there. These are all of our HTML templates. So this looks a fair bit like PHP syntax. That's kind of why I wanted to use EJS. The Jade syntax would look really different. So you can probably figure what those tags represent, which would be what? Variables. So where are those variables being set? Yeah, somewhere on the back end, it's supplying these variables. And notice it's using the same variable 3 times. In the title tag, in the H1, and in the P tag, right? So here, here, and here. So where do you suppose we should look in here to find where that variable is being passed to this page? Maybe we want to change it. So this is the front end page. Where's the back end file that talks to this page? Where do you think it would be in this? Okay, and where in roots do you suppose it is? There we go, right? You are correct. So the syntax is slightly different. Rather than using app, it's using router. So router is the generator syntax for this. So when we have a GET request at our home page, before we haven't used res.render. What do you think? We use res.write or res.send and res.end. What do you suppose the render method does? So it's calling res.render index. Somebody translate this to English. What's actually happening here? Yeah, load the view called index. We don't have to specify that the path is inside the views folder. Express just assumes the views will be inside the folder called views. Here's our variable. So we're calling it, so here's our JSON syntax. We're creating a variable called title. We're giving it a value of express. So this is where we are passing this variable into this view. So if we change it here, let's say I make a change to that value. I change it from express to express1. If I save that change and restart my application, my page is now going to say express1 everywhere. Whatever the value of my variable is here, it shows up here, here, and here. So I'm just going to stop my app for a minute. I'll restart it. And yes, using NodeMon will come in handy here. So I don't have to keep doing this. So I'm going to restart it. And now that variable shows up on all those places. So if I go back to my index, actually, I may as well change it to this. I'm going to change it to lesson 5. So if I stop and restart, now everything's going to say lesson 5.
So you replace Express with lesson 5?
Yeah. So we'll need to dive into this sort of structure a little bit more. But this is the structure we're going to use for all our applications moving forward. Why write this stuff from scratch when we can use the generator to pre-build a working application? Then we can just focus on building whatever views we need and writing whatever code we need in the root files, and then later on getting it to talk to a database. But we can use this structure because it sets up everything we need to get our application running. We just run a few commands in the command prompt and we have a skeleton we can work from. So we'll use this for everything. So in your portfolio, you should use the generator to build your site. And you just need 5 views and you need 5 root handlers to load your 5 different views, and then just put in your content and your styling. No, we'll basically, the only thing we're going to do through the command prompt is stop and start the application. We will do everything through here. So if we want a new page, we'll do this when we come back. We'll create the view, we'll create a new EJS view, and then we just need to write a root handler to load that page. Yes, it certainly is. That's the idea.
Would you say like we're gonna make a new index page for every page, or we just put all the pages in the one index?
There's different ways. There's different approaches, and we'll talk about it. It's a very good question, Scott. The answer is we'll do both. The simple way is we'll handle them all through here.
Yeah.
In a bigger application, it will get too messy, and I'll show you how and why we'll do it.
And I guess this is the lab's gonna involve this.
Yep. So your lab is basically going to be to build a really simple Express generator site. I'll show you what it will look like. Okay. All right. So I'm going to